Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Dave Warsnick. I'm here with Julie Gutowski. Welcome to the Change Action and Resource Exchange Network, Effective Strategies for Staff Communication and Accountability. Our agenda today, we get through our introductions, and we're really going to talk about 7 steps for effective communication and accountability. We're going to run through a couple of examples of what we're talking about. We'll run through, Julia will run through an example on productivity. I'll run through an example related to billing. And we're going to take a few minutes near the end, and I'm going to show you some of the tools that we have posted to the CTAC website. There are a number of tools that aid in the area of staff productivity and productivity management. We have a tool for benchmarking graphical presentations, and we'll talk a little bit about how the benchmarking tool can be used in communication with your staff. Once we're done with that, Justine will wrap us up and take us home, and that'll be it for today. So, why are we offering this additional webinar? It's really based on the rationale that the CARE process can help improve your productivity or revenue, but it can't replace basic principles of communication and accountability. We're going to outline some of the key factors needed for management success and what are the basic productivity and billing process you need to place in place to be successful. One of the things that we've talked about through all of our initiatives is that you can make changes, you can analyze problems, you can make changes, you can put them in place, but there are some really basic steps that you need to follow to be able to accurately define and communicate with your staff, and then have a process for holding people accountable that you really need to have in place to be successful. So some of the things that we'll be talking about today, and this is not rocket science. We didn't invent all of this stuff out of our head. There's some really basic best practice standards that we try to organize and put in a useful format. But again, we feel very strongly that these are foundational aspects of any change improvement plan. So the goals for today, we're going to review some of the best practice management. We'll suggest some fundamental principles. As I said, we'll review the tools. Now, what we're not going to cover today, we're not going to cover an in-depth strategy. You know, you have your problem-solving calls with your facilitators that will be coming up. Those are the areas and those are the times when we'll really dive more deeply into your plan, answer your questions, use the resource team of your cohort to help you understand and make suggestions. Today, again, we just want sort of a conceptual framework that should be in part overlaying the process for you. So we will do, before I get started with this, what we're going to ask you to do is during the course of the presentation, go ahead and if you have a question, chat it in. You should see a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Go ahead and if a question comes up, send it in. What we'll be doing is Justine will be monitoring the questions as they come through. We have a couple points through the presentation that we will pause and take a look at questions that you may have, and Julie and I will see if we can answer them for you. So go ahead and as questions come up, please think about them and go ahead and chat them in. So before we get started, we have our basic poll. We have a polling question 1. Is your entire core team in attendance for this webinar? We also have a question of how many people are in the room viewing this webinar. And the third question is who's on the line? Finance, clinic, leadership, executive leadership, clinicians, or professional staff. So let's take 15 seconds or so, and if you'd throw your answers out to us, we'd like to have share with the audience the basic composition of those folks that are on the line that we're talking with today. All right, let's hopefully you had time to answer our questions. Let's close it down and take a look at who's out there this morning or this afternoon. Did we? Oh, there we go. Okay. Entire core team, only 15% of them are yes, but you know, hopefully you have a majority of your team there. We have a lot of number ones people out there. We have some of the groups, and it looks like our split between finance, clinic leadership, executive, clinician, and professional staff is pretty even distribution. So once again, welcome everybody, and like I said, my name is David Warsnick. I'm the CFO of Spectrum Human Services, and I'm joined, as I often am, by Julie Gutowski, who is our Managing Director of Clinic Operations. So let's a lot of stuff happens. You seem to, Justine, you seem to be the only one unmuted. I'm getting a little bit of noise from the background out there. Okay. Let's start with thought we'd start with a definition of accountability. What are we really talking about here? It's really the obligation of an individual or organization to account for its activities, accept responsibility for them, and to disclose the results in a transparent manner. A couple of key pieces of this definition for me. The first thing is you have to account for your activities. You have to know what your activities are. You need to measure your activities, and you need to account for them. The second piece is you have to accept responsibility. Nothing happens at random. We need to accept the responsibilities for the activities that are occurring. And the final piece here is disclosure. And not just any type of disclosure, but disclosure in a transparent way. One of the things that we really want people to be thinking about is developing an environment of accountability, and that's across your entire organization, with your executive leadership down through your organization, and that transparency and honesty and good data are really the kinds of key cornerstones to creating an environment of accountability and accepting responsibility for actions. So what we're going to do today, we're going to go through what we've pulled together from a number of different sources, which is 7 steps that, as I said, are required to develop a culture and environment that supports and rewards accountability. Sometimes we think about accountability as being a punitive system. One of the things that we'll be talking about and thinking about is that accountability also gives you a structure for which you can reward people for their actions. So we're going to talk about developing shared operational definitions, operational expectations, talk a little bit about answering the question of why are we doing this, talk a bit about monitoring performance, providing continuous feedback, applying consequences, and, as always, continuous improvement.
First step would be to develop shared operational definitions. And what you really want to do is you want to set for the main tasks definitions that everybody knows and everybody accepts, okay? They need to be clear, concise, and well communicated so everybody knows what a no-show means. You need to make sure that your definitions have a specific measurable indicator. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to understand whether or not you've hit that goal you're trying to attain. Really, you're going to look at all different aspects of a person's job that they're going to be held accountable for. Do you have internally a definition of no-show? And now, when we're on some of these calls, sometimes we'll use terms like walk-in clinic, instant access. And what our next follow-up is, question, what does that mean to you? A no-show across an organization needs to mean the same thing for every single clinician. Otherwise, if I think a no-show is if somebody doesn't call or cancel and just doesn't attend the appointment, and the clinician next to me thinks a no-show is if somebody doesn't give 24 hours notice. Obviously, the data is going to be different because we're not using the same measure. Okay? They really should be written down and available to all staff. You want to make them clear and concise and kind of easy to remember so people don't have to refer back to the written definition if they need to. Clearly measurable and quantifiable, really very objective and not subjective. At our organization, a no-show is defined as somebody who misses an appointment and gives less than 24 hours advance notice. So when we moved to this definition, some of the clinicians had a challenge because according to them and their belief system, the no-show is, Timmy had an appointment with me today, he did not come, it's a no-show. So we need to spend a lot of time educating everybody about why is this our standard definition and how does it make sense. And we had a lot of communications and discussions about, well, why do you feel it's punitive if we define it as a no-show this way? And really got people's information differently in their viewpoints, and really spent a lot of time talking about, well, why do you think that, and why did the agency choose to define no-show as this?
So, this may seem very basic, but it really comes out of conversations that we've had with people in clinics, conversations as simple as what's your definition of a unit of service? Or what's your definition of a no-show? Really, there are people who have really not quantified those definitions and communicated them and have them in a way that you can hold people accountable to them, measure them, and communicate them.
And a good example for me is when I started in clinic, I'm the biggest rule follower. Tell me the rule and I'm going to follow it. So when I started in clinic as a clinician, I was told I had to hit like 28 units a week. And so I was like, okay, I can hit 28 units a week. Well, I always did that and I always did what I was supposed to do. And then what happened is I earned vacation time and I took a week off. And then there was all this communication from my supervisor that I didn't hit the monthly productivity. And my thought was, but you told me 28 a week, I do 28 a week. And really the communication and what they were considering, my unit expectation was a yearly expectation. So if I were given that definition up front that I was expected to provide 1,100 units of service in a year, when I took the vacation time off, I would know that before I took my vacation time and after, I had to overproduce a little bit, because the week when I was off, I obviously wasn't hitting my productivity. And so for me, that was a really good example about having a universal definition that everybody understands.
So after step one, after you define what it is that we're talking about, what are the activities, and we're talking a lot about productivity, but you also need operational definitions as it relates to the billing process, and we'll talk a little bit about that a bit more when we go into some of the examples. So once you set the once you set the definitions, then you have to set the operational expectations. And we say operational because these are not conceptual. These are actual numbers. Like Julie said, you need to generate 23 units per week, and that is X number of units per month, and that's X number of units per quarter, and that's X number of units per year. These are the expectations. Now, sometimes we have definitions and we have operational expectations, but we have difficulty gathering the data that we need to measure. So one of the things that's important is when you create operational definitions and when you set expectations, it has to be something you can measure. So if you can't get information out of your billing system and you need to track productivity, then you need a system that allows you, and it could be off system, of collecting that data and reporting it back to people. So make sure your definitions and your expectations really relate to information and expectations that you can measure. So, as an example, we talked about the example of, how many units of service do you need to do? And you need to have expectations for all aspects of a person's job that they will be held accountable for. So let's talk about the billing side. Well, you have a clinical staff, and they are accountable to have their paperwork done on a daily basis before the end of the business day. They are responsible for having all of their treatment plans signed in and within the appropriate time frame. You may have your staff that are your billing staff are responsible to assure that eligibility is validated before every visit. These are the operational expectations. This is what our expectations are of you, but in all aspects of the job that we are going to hold you accountable for. It's a little bit more difficult when you hold people accountable for good quality clinical care. That's why you have supervision. That's why you have URQA. That's why you have those secondary processes. But it's really vital that you have not, and we focus on productivity, but there are a number of expectations that you have for individual staff across your organization, and those need to be clearly articulated to people. Again, write them down. Make them available to all staff, and make sure that you have a process for all new staff that are trained explicitly and directly on the expectations that they are going to be held accountable to. And make sure you have a good process to do this. Sometimes we fall down a little bit in that area, and that we sort of let people to their own devices and then get a little bit surprised 30 days afterwards that they're really not quite certain what we expect of them. So, again, have it written down and make sure that you are training your staff.
Step 3 is to really answer, why are we doing this? You have the definitions, the expectations, but the next piece is to explain to the staff that are going to be held accountable and responsible for this, why these changes are happening, and why is a no-show considered less than 24-hour notice. You really need to provide a context for why the expectation exists and the consequences if they're not met. You're going to talk with staff. We're very transparent at Spectrum, and we let staff know if we have a change coming about, the reasons for the change, the thoughts we put into making the changes, and any ways we feel like we need to adapt practice. And a lot of it is explaining, why are we doing this, okay? Form a collaborative culture where staff feels goals that are going to benefit them and also the agency, that they're part of the team. It really has to rely on an organizational climate that fosters buy-in and commitment. Anybody can say to a clinician, okay, now every single visit you do is 30 minutes now because it'll increase productivity. The problem with that is clinicians are in the field because we want to help people, otherwise we'd be somewhere else. So really it's to explain why, if you're making a change, why is the change necessary, and why is that the route the agency's taking, and to get some feedback from staff as to what challenges they have with it. You need to really try to get personal buy-in for the individual staff member, also for the team, but the organization as a whole. People really need to understand how does this impact them, and these changes that we're making in these definitions and having people accountable, how does that help them as an individual? How does it help the agency, and how does it help the team? Because I said so is not going to get the buy-in that you need to make your changes successful. You need to start thinking about and talking about positive consequences and the negative consequences instead of just focusing on, if we don't make this change, you know, we may have to look at cutting staff salaries. We may have to downsize our staff. Clinic might close, okay? Those are some very real consequences if we don't meet the goals. But also we need to make sure that we're talking about the positive consequences if we are able to meet the goals that we set, okay? What could that mean? Well, for me, and as a clinician, I'm really concerned about client care, and typically everybody working in human services is. So if we hit the goals of productivity, what that's going to allow us to do is help make sure that we can continue to provide good quality services, and we might be able to expand the services. For a staff, personally, what that could mean is more job security, which is really hard in this current climate, and also the potential for a financial reward, whether that would be a raise, a bonus, but other ways that we can get benefits from meeting these goals.
Yeah, I think for me this is a real critical aspect of the whole process. When we, seems like ages ago, when we did the APG conversion, we really took that as an opportunity to retool our clinic services, rethink about what units of service are, rethink about what productivity is, and that was really at that point the basis of the benchmarking tool. We didn't really know what we needed to do to be viable in this changing environment. So once we figured it out, then we went around and we met with the staff, and we brought the financial modeling tool out and said, you know, this is how we came to the productivity expectation. This is the national standard around that productivity expectation. This is what happens positively when we meet that. This is what happens negatively when we miss that. People really want to have a context. They want to understand why we're asking them to do the difficult things we're asking them to do. And then secondarily, they need to know what the consequences are. But we always warn, don't always focus on the negative consequence. I think sometimes we get so far behind the eight ball, it's we need to do this, else we're all going to go away, that, well, we need to do this because we can continue to meet the mission of the organization. You can continue to do what you like to do, which is do clinical work, and we will be viable going forward. So do the positives and the negatives. So we've defined what it is we're holding people accountable for. We've told them how much, when, where, how, and why, and now we need to monitor what's going on. So this is a huge portion of this. So we need accurate, timely, quantitative methods for communication. So you need your information. It doesn't do you any good if you're holding people to holding people accountable to monthly productivity numbers and they don't know for 60 days afterwards what their numbers were. It doesn't help them if the information that we provide to them is inaccurate. And it certainly doesn't help if the information has no context to it. It's, here's a number. So they need to be accurate, timely, and quantitative. It really needs to be focused not only on individual, but individual and organizational performance against your goals and expectations. Information should be focused to what your expectations you have for people and the goal of your organization. So keeping specific, sometimes what you end up with is you're getting information out to people that is more information than they need, and that just becomes confusing. That's background noise. So one of the things we've been working on recently is really honing in on your data presentation, keeping it in a format that is easy to view, easy to understand, and helpful. So then, you know, you get your information. It could be coming out of your billing systems, it could be coming out of your medical record systems. Put them together in real time. I'm not a big report guy. I like to see graphs. I like to see bar graphs. I like to see line graphs to show me trends. We do a lot with regression analysis to create trend lines. I think that you'll find that people are more visual. A lot of your clinicians sit there and look at a table and have to find their name and go over the rows, and sometimes it's simpler just at a glance, a quick graph, see where they are today, where they were yesterday, to where they need to go going forward. If you don't have the data for the metrics, are there other data that you can use? So, you know, we've talked a lot with clinics about, well, I can't get that information. Well, then what information can you get that's related, that's accurate and timely, and you can give back to people? You know, do you need to count it on a yellow legal pad and then, or on a spreadsheet? But find ways to get data that you can rely upon. One of the things, if you're not doing a lot of this, one of the things that we all run into in these early stages is you give people information and then the calls start coming in. I don't think this is right. I think I did more than these. You know, and that in many cases is inevitable, particularly when you start holding people accountable to quantitative numbers. Sometimes that happens because we haven't done a good enough job of creating the definitions and communicating the expectations. So if you start giving data out to people and they start coming back to you questioning the accuracy, circle back and make sure that your definitions are clear. And believe it or not, data that we get out of our systems sometimes is inaccurate. So go through a process with your staff, and it's a labor-intensive process. You take the questions, answer them, vet the data, make sure we're creating it correctly, and then if there's a misunderstanding, work with your staff to help them understand what you're giving to them. Because if you're not on the same page, if there's no trust in the data, it all turns into background noise. It becomes a distraction that takes you away from focusing on what you need to be focusing on. So if you get to that stage, again, do you have the right definitions? Are you communicating the expectation? Is, in fact, your data accurate? You may find that it is not. So I always suggest for people, when you can start this process, let everybody know. It's going to be a working process. If there's questions you have, if you don't understand, come back to us. We'll vet the data, we'll get it, and that background noise will go away relatively quickly. And, of course, as I said, present it in an easy format. You know, a piece of paper with a handwritten unit of service number for an individual for a week is really not the kind of communication we're talking about. Something that really helps people understand where they are today, where they were yesterday, and where they need to go tomorrow is one of the ways of thinking about how you present information to people. There's a ton of tools inside of Excel that'll help you do that. and we do have a tool that will be showing you at the end that might be helpful for you.
The next step is really to provide continuous feedback, and for me it's very closely linked with monitoring performance. Like David said, sometimes a clinician will say, this isn't right, I know I worked harder than this. And sometimes my knee-jerk reaction is, no you didn't, it is what it is. But it's important that you sit down with the staff and we'll go through the data and look to make sure that it is right. And in that opportunity, it's a discussion about, I'm not saying that you're not working hard because I know you're working hard. Everybody here works hard. Let's see where we need to change things a little bit differently. And the reality is when you're taking an eyeball before at the data, if something doesn't look right, I always go in and double check it, because the data is going to be right. Perhaps what has happened is the display's off a little bit. For example, I had somebody start in clinic and she exceeded her productivity for the first month. That's never happened in clinic before that I've ever worked in. And so obviously in my head I'm like, the data's wrong. She obviously, maybe she isn't doing her notes right, and really spent time because the data was so irregular and such an anomaly from what I have been used to spend the time to go in and look. And the bottom line is she is my only clinician that I've ever worked with in all the years in human services that was able to hit her productivity at month 1, and she actually did. So step 5 is really providing continuous feedback. And you want to do that, I think it's important on an individual, a group, and at an organizational level. You have to design a method for providing feedback to employees and other stakeholders on a consistent basis. So people are getting relevant information in the manner in which it's easy to read, because clinicians don't want to spend a lot of time and other people don't want to spend a lot of time looking at the numbers. Well, what does this mean? I'm supposed to hit 93 units a month, but I hit 95. I know that's more, but what's the percent? You're just better analyzing that data and giving them a quick graphic, easy to read display of, hey, this is where you are towards your goal. You want to make sure that you're communicating a narrative that outlines the progress towards meeting the goals and expectations. Feedback can both be verbally and by report. Ensure information that is accurate, timely, and easy to understand. And really use the information as a basis for working cooperatively with the staff to problem solve. Because for me, if somebody's not hitting their productivity, I think as a manager, what we need to do is really look at, have we given that staff the support, training, and guidance they need to be successful? Are we really looking at their strengths and what additional supports do they need in order to be able to meet the goals? Again, it's not punitive. It's providing feedback, and our job as managers and as an organization is to help our staff meet their goals. Feedback can be formal and informal. What we do is we have a very transparent display of information. Anybody can go in and look at which sites are hitting their productivity and which individual clinicians are hitting their productivity. So that's one piece of the continuous feedback. We also do quarterly evaluations where productivity is a piece of it. Another piece of the eval is the clinical documentation. So we have really formal means in order to give feedback, and then we have the more informal means. So every month for people who hit their productivity, I send out like a little thank you, a little token. Recently was like tiny little box of junior mints. I meant to tell you thank you for everything you do. Then, you know, you have the informal when somebody does a great job and goes above and beyond, where you just send them an email that says, thanks, hey, I really noticed you did this, you did it well, thank you. And people start paying attention to that. And for me, that's a way to give some more informal feedback to people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions we get all the time regarding feedback, and everybody has a different way of doing this, is how much information do you give? How transparent are you? And that's really a choice that needs to be made at your individual clinic level. We made the choice some while back to be transparent, and we display like Julie said, we display everybody's productivity. We display all of the site's productivity, and that's available to be viewed by anybody in the organization. We have a corporate intranet. We post it on the intranet under our area for our performance, meeting our performance outcomes. That's the approach that we have taken. Some people take a much different approach in how they make information available to people. There's really no right or wrong way of doing that, but there needs to be a way of doing that, and you need to be consistent in how you do that. And you need to make sure that the way you do that supports you meeting your goals. Like I said, there's no right and wrong. Let's just make sure we do it. Applying consequences. So, well, we talked about a couple things. So, you make your definition, and you have your expectations, and you explain to people why, and then you monitor, and you get data, and then you give feedback to people, and then you get to a point where it's either working or it's not working. And it could be working organizationally but not working at an individual level, or not working at an organizational level and working at some individual. I mean, there's going to be a whole mishmash of, this is our goal, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is how you fit into this. You get to a point where either it's working or not, and to make this whole system work, there has to be consequences. But you need to be thinking about, there has to be, they can't always be negative consequences. Scaring people out the door, although they need to understand what the reality is and what is needed of them and why it is needed of them. And there has to be some consequence if they can't meet it. There also has to be some consequence if they do. It's, basically the carrot and the stick, and you hope you're always using the carrot. But there has to be a consequence. There are staff who will not be able to meet the expectations that you have of them. There'll be clinical staff who can't do that. There'll be support staff. There'll be supervisors. There'll be billing staff. Sometimes the people just don't meet those expectations, and that would be a negative consequence for them and their continued employment. On the other hand, if you have a system that really supports accountability and people are really working and you're giving them the tools, then your chance of success are greater, and there needs to be some positive consequences for that. Doesn't always have to be money. Julie talks about thanking people by due recognition. One of the good things about being transparent about units of service is when people are doing well, everybody knows it. And they can be proud of that fact, and that's a very positive thing. So be thinking about, but there will need to be consequences. You'll see on the slide, the bold piece there is, have you provided your staff with the knowledge, tools, and support for them to be successful? We, as clinic leadership and executive leadership, we have to know that at the end of the day, we did everything that we could do to support people to be successful, to meet our expectations. The first thing we have to do is we have to define, then we have to communicate what the expectations are. We have to feel comfortable that the expectations are reasonable, that people can reach them. We have to communicate. We have to explain why. We have to give people the information. We have to give them the support and the tools and the technology to be successful. It's very difficult to hold people accountable in an environment that they don't have what they need to be successful. So from the executive leadership level, I think it's really the responsibility to assure that all the pieces are in place. If the pieces are in place, you really can't hold people accountable. And if you can't hold people accountable and you can't apply the consequences, and your chances of being successful are probably very limited. So again, ask the question, are we doing everything we can? Are we giving people what they need to be successful? And if the answer is yes, and you're comfortable with that, at the end of the day, there are people who aren't going to make it. But hopefully, there'll be more people, certainly, that can be successful. And hopefully, we've defined some positive consequence for them to reap that reward.
Step 7 is continuous improvement. Realistically, what you need to do is you need to set these definitions and these goals, and then you're going to continue to adapt them and make sure that you're on track for hitting your goals, and if you're not, how you're going to adjust things a little bit. It really is a process that evaluates the tools and methods to use to support the accountability and success. If something isn't working, really you want to consider asking your staff, what do they think is getting in the way? What do they need? What will be helpful for them? What do they think the answer may be? It's management's responsibility to ensure actions that what I do models accountable behavior. I don't want to blame staff for somebody not hitting their productivity. What I want to do is I want to make sure that any barriers that I can remove from the staff meeting their goal of productivity or the clinical documentation, that I've gone through and done that. Really look at the tools, the process, and systems that are put into place to ensure that staff can be successful. There's always room for improvement. You can communicate better, more clearly. You can have more user-friendly reports. You can always look to tweak things so it requires less work for the staff, but you have the same outcomes. And you really want to ensure that your accountability systems are transparent. And the accountability needs to start at the top, the executive management, and go all the way down.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add, and it's exactly what Julie said, there's always room for improvement. We're currently working on what will be our third iteration of our performance management communication system. Trying to simplify things, trying to change internal structures so we can get the information out to people more quickly. Better ways of viewing data, better ways of communicating with people, updating our communication platform, our SharePoint platform. It's a constant process, and it can always be improved. And we as executive management have a responsibility to assure that we're keeping our eye on that, and we are working to do our part of what we're accountable for, which is giving people the tools that they need to be successful, and we're constantly improving that and holding ourselves accountable to the organizational expectations.
And I liken it to, I don't want to be a dinosaur. Okay, what I mean by that is we have a managing director here in charge of our PROS programs, and she's been with the agency for probably 30 years. And she had so much experience in day treatment. But then when it became apparent that day treatment kind of wasn't going to be the way of the future, this PROS thing seemed to be taking off, she spent a lot of her time knowing everything and learning everything she could about PROS. So I say, I don't want to be a dinosaur. I want to be Kathy Wood. I'm never going to be perfect. I just want to continue to build my skills. So there's always room for improvement. I think it's important as any type of individual to realize that, you know what, I might be really great at A and I can do it verbatim, but that doesn't mean that B is not going to become important in the future.
Yeah, and you know, if you're a clinic manager out there and if you don't know how to use Excel, you probably should get yourself to a training. Because the world is data. The world is data and data management and data presentation. You know, Excel is the tool that is foundational to being able to manage large amounts of information. And if you can't work in that space at all, then you really need to be thinking about upgrading your skills in that area. Else you'll end up being the dinosaur. So, time to take a quick pause. We've gone through all of the initial 7 steps. Again, as I said in the beginning, it's not rocket science. We're not telling you anything you don't know, but hopefully we're able to organize them in such a way that are sort of linear, build upon each other, and give you a better context for what you're doing and how you're working with the staff. So I see that there haven't been any questions. So if you do have a question, send them in. Justine's sitting in the background taking a look at this as they come in. And if there is a question, we'll pause. Since there's not, we'll just move right along here.
Okay, so we're going to look at the deep dive productivity. Really, how do the 7 steps we talked about before really apply to productivity? And so step 1 is, in order to be able to measure productivity, you need to define what a unit of service is, okay? And for us, a CPT weight equal to 1 is a unit of service. Back in the day before the weight, what would happen is if I saw somebody for an individual session, that'd be equal to 1. If I had somebody in my group, that also equaled 1. And it really wasn't based on the weight of the service or the reimbursement. So what we've done is really look at the unit of service is really based on the CPT weight and it's equivalent to 1. That being said, the truth is it would be very difficult to get a 1. Because if you think about a 30-minute individual session, it's 0.67. If you think about a 45, it's 0.82 or 0.83, in between there, okay? So what you really want to do is to define what is your unit of service, so then you can set your expectations, and that's step 2. If your unit of service expectation is 23 units per week, 93 units per month, or 1,116 units per year. Again, we go back to my anecdote when I first started in clinic and they told me I owed 23 units per week. I take a vacation off, I think, you can't expect that I can do units when I'm not there. Whereas if I were given the information that, yeah, it kind of breaks out to 23 units a week, but really, Julie, at the end of the day, you owe 1,116 units. I would have reacted differently and changed my practice. Again, step 3, communicate why. Really use the benchmarking tool to demonstrate how unit expectations are determined. We did not, in our head, at night, one day, think, you know, it'd be great, 23 units a week. What happens is we use the benchmarking tool to figure out what do we need to remain fiscally viable or break even. And so using that tool to explain to clinicians, why are we doing this? Why are we changing from 1 equals 1 to 1 equals a CPT weight of 1? And really show the positive and the negative consequences. The positive, if we hit our productivity, what could that mean? The negative, if we don't hit our productivity, what could that mean? Step 4 is really monitor performance, provide monthly unit productivity reports. Again, we use a bar graph. It's nice. You go in, you open it up, you click. I can see at a glance, the green bar is good, the red is bad. I don't need to be a mathematician or know a lot about computers. All I need to know is green is good, okay? And then you're going to provide that information not only by the individual, but as a clinic. I don't have a whole bunch of private practitioners working in my office at Spectrum. What I have is I have practitioners who are working as part of a team because the team has expectations about what it needs to hit in order to stay viable, and we can hit as a team if we hit individual. And then provide feedback. Work with staff and individual supervision on strategies that are going to support success. What I mean is if you have somebody not hitting productivity, then there needs to be a conversation and supervision about what seems to be the barriers, what's getting in the way. Typically when I get involved because somebody's not hitting productivity, the first thing I always go to is I look at their scheduling practice. They're not scheduling enough to account for no-shows, cancellations, and other things. And so really look at somebody's scheduling practice and talk to them about that. Really providing feedback, general suggestions, but then suggestions specific to that person, okay? You're going to apply consequences, reward staff who exceed unit expectations. Part of the reward system, like I spoke about, is I meant to tell you, one clinic literally brings their little tokens that are sent and they open them as a team because they're proud whether they hit their productivity or not. So really that's a way to apply a positive consequence. And then for the negative consequence, it's not really, it's more of a conversation about what supports, guidance, and education can we give you that will help you do this. These are the suggestions I have for you that may help you hit your productivity. And then 7 is continuously improve. Meet regularly with staff to discuss what's working, what doesn't work, and to try new things. It's so important that we get the feedback from the staff that are providing the services and doing the position, what they think works and what they think doesn't work. You get buy-in, it increases morale, and the reality is, in my head I conceptualize or think about what I think it must be like to work in clinic full-time, but I don't work in clinic full-time anymore. So I need their feedback so we can continuously improve our processes.
Thanks, Sherry. It's just a little example, and I know some of you are working on billing and collections, and I find billing and collections to be sort of an interesting process within an organization. In our organization, yes.
We actually have 2 comments that came in about the productivity, and I thought that before we go into billing, we could maybe address them briefly. Okay.
Sure.
One of them is just a comment from Andy from Master Services, just kind of saying, you know, they've definitely kind of started to define units of service based on contact hours. So they really kind of looked at billed hours for the week and expect 25 hours per week.
Okay.
So it's a practice that they use. And then we had a question about, and this is kind of like a much larger issue, I think, but maybe if you can just even address it briefly is, you know, throughout this accountability monitoring for productivity, can you talk a little bit about incentives and rewards and some kind of successful models that clinics have used? So again, it's a large topic as a whole, but if you could just comment, both of you on it, that would be great.
Okay, thanks. I think we did a webinar at one point on incentive models. I think, Julie, were you involved with that? Would you like to talk a little bit about what you guys talked about in that webinar?
Sure. I mean, I think some clinics have the luxury that you're able to offer financial incentives, such as if you exceed productivity by 3% in this time period, you may be able to earn like a couple $100 bonus. A lot of clinics don't necessarily have that money or the budget to do that type of thing. So then for me and for us, it's what can we look at to provide incentives to the staff who are working so hard as a reward. And that's kind of where the little tokens a month came from. Because when I go into clinicians' offices, and the reality is we have 13 clinics, and I would say we probably have 50 clinicians. And so each month when people hit their productivity, they get the little token, okay? A lot of people have it posted in their office. It means something to them, and it makes them proud that they're hitting their productivity, but it's not really, the tokens and the statements really don't speak to great job, you hit your productivity. It's really about thanks to your clinical skills, you're really doing a great job providing outstanding service. Because for me, if you're able to hit your productivity, it's because you do have really good clinical skills. If you're not hitting your productivity, it might be a scheduling issue, and we can look at that piece. But really speak to and affirm for people all the positive and the hard work that they do, what we did at the end of last year, and we have to get it out again in clinic, is basically it was 4 paragraphs, and we sent it to every employee at Spectrum got it, a breakdown of this is what we did in the year as a team, because it's not only my clinicians who work hard in order for us to stay viable and hit our productivity, it's the billing department, it's the support staff, it's the person who comes and cleans to make sure my site is clean. It's an entire team. And what it was is, it was 4 basic little paragraphs. These were our goals. This is where we hit our goals, and this was what we're looking forward to doing. Thank you for your role you had in it. So really it's about thanking everybody and being really transparent. But the clinicians really liked it because it was a nice highlight of all of the hard work that they do every day. And so for me, those type of little incentives I think are important. Other ways you could give incentives is to look at your training budget. What trainings are you paying for as an agency that you might be able to set up as an incentive? Trainings that we can provide not only to clinical staff, but customer service staff, customer service trainings for the support staff. Those type of things I think are incentives to me too, that support what we're trying to do as an agency, which is to stay in business and really provide the best quality behavioral health. And everybody has a role in that. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that just to add is that, you know, we're all in a very tough economic environment, and a lot of us are at the table here because we are struggling. So sometimes we have to be creative. We have to ask ourselves, what is bringing people to the table? Why are they here? Why are they putting up with our expression crap every day? Because there's something driving them. There's something, you know, think about what that is. Why are they here? And then build off of that. Because if they wanted to be making more money, they would have been doing something else. Not that they wouldn't take it and wouldn't love to have it and wouldn't we love to give it. But that's not always viable. So be thinking creatively about what it is we can give people to support them, help them feel good about what they're doing. And, you know, people who are not making their productivity, in almost all cases, they're not lazy. They're struggling. They don't know how to do it. They have difficulty. They're not as organized as we would like them to be. They don't know how to schedule properly. They need work on their engagement skills. I don't think we have one person in the organization that is not working very hard. Keep that in mind. You know, if you're building a punitive environment, you'll get what you build. So keep that positive and as positive as you can. I know a lot of you folks are in here because you're working on billing and collection, so let's use a little example that sort of focuses in on that. We've been talking a lot about productivity during the course of the presentation. So let's do step 1. So I've got a problem here in that the rate of collection on the number of services that we're providing is low. There's 6% as an example. 6% of the claims, or 6% of the client contacts we have, we're not receiving payment for. So that's a problem. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to define what's a clean claim. And that definition for me is that it's a client encounter that's recorded, documented, provided, and billed in a manner that assures that payment will be received and retained. So what does that mean? That the clinical record keeping has to be done correctly. The staging and the finalization of the information on the claim has to be done correctly. It has to be the right kind of visit. It has to be for the time frames allowed. It has to be with an eligible client. It has to be with a eligible provider. and that it has to go out the door. It has to go out the door in a timely fashion, and when you put all those pieces in place, then we will be assured that we will receive payment. The last piece of there is and retained. I don't know if any of you folks out there have had an OMIG audit. Retaining your revenue is a vital piece here. You have to have all the pieces in place to make sure that, having the cash in the door is one thing. Being able to keep it 2 years down the road when the OMIG comes in and does an audit is another thing. So the billing concept of a clean claim is a clean claim forever. Nobody will ever take it back from you, and you really have to define each of the different aspects that need to be in place and accurate for you to be able to retain that. This is one of the more complicated things organizations do, to be perfectly honest with you. You think you press a button and a bill goes out, but you have clinical line staff, you have clinical supervisors, you have support staff, you have billing staff, you have finance staff. You have these different work groups that now need to cooperate in a process and communicate each other, and it is vital that in each step, people are meeting their expectations, because at any one point in this process, if somebody doesn't meet their expectation, that claim's not going to be a good claim anymore. So when we talk about accountability and expectations, it becomes not more critical, but more complicated when you get into the billing, because it's a set of relationships between groups that don't normally communicate with each other, are not normally reliant upon each other, but as it relates to the bill, everybody needs to do what they need to do. So you need to define it. You need to clearly outline your expectations. So it's an example of setting expectations. 100% of services generate a clean claim. So a 0 denial rate, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But you also, as I'm saying, you have to break it down by different staff, and these are just examples. So for your front office staff, 100% of the visits will be scheduled. 100% of in our system, when you schedule an appointment, you basically stage the claim. So who it is, when it is, what service is going to be provided, eligibility, payer, and if it doesn't go through that system, then your error rate goes up exponentially. So you have rules and you have structures 100% of the time. 100% of the clients will have their eligibility checked before their visit. Worst thing is you're providing services for somebody using resources. Yes, they need it, but no, we're not getting reimbursed for it. So set expectations for your front office staff. You can set expectations for your clinical staff. Treatment plans will be completed and properly signed in 100% of the client charts. Progress notes will be completed before the end of the business day on 100% of the clients. Again, examples of pieces that are vital to assure, maybe the treatment plan date is out of order, but the insurance company is not going to know that. And you're going to get billed for it, and you're going to get a payment for that. But what happens when your quality assurance group goes and looks at it and says, oh, no, we've got to avoid this claim. This is not a proper claim. Or heaven forbid, the OMIG could come in and then find these errors and apply a return rate going back 3 years. So just because the money's in the door doesn't mean that you can keep it. So make sure your expectations that you have for people support that. Billing staff. 100% of the claims will be submitted within 30 days. 100% of the denials will be followed up on, and there will be a documentation of the resolution. So we talk about in the billing side, you have expectations across multiple work groups. Communicate why. Again, you can take the benchmarking tool. One of the things that we have in the benchmarking tool is called no payment. And that's a percentage of your visits that you are not receiving payment for. Now, I've worked with a lot of clinics, and in their model, they have zero. They collect every single dollar that they bill out. I would challenge them to be able to show to me that they do, in fact, have a zero denial rate. And sometimes when people look a little bit more closely into this, they find that denial rate starts creeping up, and it's 4% and it's 6%. Play with the model. Put 6% denial rate in that model and see what the bottom line effect is. It's huge. It is a significant variable in the model. So when you're talking to people, you know, they can understand, well, you know, so we miss a couple of these claims and this, you know, this doesn't happen. So you can sit down with the model and you can say, okay, our denial rate is 6%. What would happen if we ran that down to 2%? Well, I think that in a lot of cases, people's eyes are going to go wide open because they're going, well, wow, that is a significant difference. So the whys, particularly if you can show it to them quantitatively, that really supports the buy-in. Oh, now I get it. Now I know why. And then, so provide information. I mean, a simple could be is what's your denial rate for the month, for the quarter. I mean, how many of these claims? Right now we're at 6%, and we've changed this and we're doing this, and last month the denial rate was only 4% or 3% or 2%. I mean, you can go down to the individual level. You could monitor completion of the paperwork. You can monitor the eligibility checks. You can really monitor all the aspects. In this, so when you do monitoring, you can do global, you can do individual. If you want to hold people accountable, your monitoring systems have to be able to record what those individual people are doing. So here's an example of sort of a global monitoring where you really need to create monitoring systems that speak explicitly to individuals' responsibilities. It gets a little bit harder when you start getting into the billing area. And sometimes it's a little bit more difficult to clearly quantify expectations. Difficulty doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. So you need to focus in on each of the people in the process. What is vital for them to do to be successful? Define it, communicate the expectation, monitor, and then, as we've talked about before, apply consequences. Reward staff who exceed expectation and sanction staff who continually fail to meet performance. It's when I think about the billing structure, I could have one person who fails to meet their expectation, who could easily put hundreds of thousands of dollars at risk. There's not a margin for error in this process. There is none. So you need to sanction individuals who can't carry out their responsibilities. Again, asking yourself, are we giving them all the tools that they need to be successful? And if you are and they can't, you don't have the right match there. So again, in the billing side, as it relates to fiscal viability, the margin of error, OMIG comes out, you know, they'll give you a couple percent. You go beyond that and pull your checkbook out. And then continuously improve. This is really, it's cross-disciplinary, as I talked about before. You have people in different parts of the organization. One of the concepts that I sort of started thinking about when I wanted to put this accountability piece together was the fact that you do have work groups that don't interact with each other normally, and they're dependent upon each other, and they all have very complicated expectations to make this successful. So what's the process you put in place to make sure that everybody can survive and that can thrive and be successful? And that's in part of why I put together this presentation. And celebrate success. I mean, this is good. down to 2%. That could be hundreds of thousands of dollars based upon the size of your clinic. That's no small return, and find ways that you can celebrate that with your staff.
And like David said, you're really talking about a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and each of us have our own lingo. So when I get an email from billing about something, and they write the email because they understand what they're saying and they're using their own language, my response back a lot of times is, could you really break this down for me? Pretend like I'm, in 4th grade because I don't understand what this says. Then they're like, oh, okay. And then they'll tell me exactly what I need to know. And as clinic leadership, one of the thoughts could be, well, billing's not my problem. The issue is everything's our problem because we're all interdependent together. And, if your clinic is having a hard time hitting their productivity, or you're just hitting your productivity to stay fiscally viable, but you still have a deficit and you still don't have enough to break even, and then I think, I can't ask my clinicians to work any harder. They truly can't. This is a nice area that you can focus on that could have potentially a huge effect.
Okay, we're going to take a second. I see Justine, a couple more chats came in. Have you taken a look? Is there something that you think we might be able to address?
I think that the clear kind of question was if anyone has was just asking for a little bit of further clarification on the incentive model that Julie was talking about. So for example, when you hand out the little acknowledgments, do you have concrete proof that productivity increases? Or is it a little bit more complicated, like each supervisor must go skill by skill with each supervisee to identify the processes that are obstructing productivity and revising systems accordingly?
How I do it, and I can't speak to how anybody else does it, I do it because I am a therapist, and I believe in CBT, and I believe that you reward behavior you want to continue. What I would say is, because we've put these pieces into place, which do include the little incentives, our chemical dependency clinics experienced, I believe, a 5% to I can't remember the exact percent, 10% growth in 1 year with the same number of staff. So I think that you need to really look at what is the incentive and what are you trying to reward and measure. And I think that it really does increase morale. And to me, if you have good morale, people have a tendency to work harder and be happier, which of course is going to increase productivity. But I haven't ever done a measurement. I guess, well, we could go to this. We could have the discussion related to contingency management that we all know is an evidence-based practice that we can use with our clients, and that's rewarding behaviors that we want to see actually increases the likelihood of those behaviors. So I guess I could say yes then.
Okay, we're going to be running out of time. So what I did want to do is to show you a couple of the tools that are out on the CTAC website under Financial Tools. And my plug for using and learning Excel is based upon the fact that pretty much almost everything that we provide from the financial area is really based on Excel models. And they can be used for a number of different purposes. So you can go to the CTAC website, and there's a section under Financial Tools, and you can go in there, and if the tool was presented by a webinar, there'll be a webinar out there that will talk explicitly about the tools. Each of the tools have an instruction tab on them, on the first tab of the spreadsheet. And my suggestion would be as you go in, you bring them down. If you find one that you think you can utilize inside of your clinic, then my suggestion would be is that you go to the webinar and look through the recording and take a look at them. So most of them are very simple and easy to use. So let's start with something real quick. This is a self-management tool that we developed here at Spectrum. What it does is it allows you to use the billable to paid hour concept and explain it to staff. And like I said, I'm going to go through this real quickly. You should put your personal leave time in there, what your work day is, what your billable standard is, what your no-show rate is. And like Julie talked about, is that it's important for staff to understand that sometimes 100% is not really 100%. And here's an example that your ability to generate units of service in any one month, it's dependent upon the number of days in the month, and it's all work days in the month, and it's also dependent upon the number of holidays that are in the month and the days that you take off during the month. So if you have a month that you take a week's worth of vacation or 2 weeks worth of vacation, you are absolutely unable to meet your expectation for that month. Therefore, you should have had a bank, as Julie talks about it, to be able to draw down on when you need it. So this is a way that people can sort of map out their year to give them an idea based upon how they normally use their time. Most people take the vacation at the same time, approximately. They take it in June, they take it in July. So this allows people to sort of map out their time a little bit. Then they can actually input their actual unit service and be able to monitor their own performance. So we have a couple more productivity tools. This is a bit more complicated. This is a monthly productivity tool that allows you to track individuals on a monthly basis, put in the number of units, type of contacts that they've had, and it'll generate the CPT weight. It will aggregate it across the months for individuals and give you a year-to-date picture. So if you want a good way of, if all you have is the number of contacts by type and have no way to do your CPT weighting, this would be a good tool to use because all you have to do is put the contact type in. As you'll see, this individual did 120 of 90791 during the course of the year, and it'll calculate your CPT weight for you. So this is a monthly, it's a little bit different approach of based upon the information that you may or may not have. There's what's called a productivity estimator. What this will allow you to do is to put in your paid time off, like the other one, put in your standard work week, put in your billable hours, and then put in what your basic service mix is, and it'll calculate the number of contacts you need. Again, a lot of people struggle with the CPT weighting piece because they don't have good information. So some of the tools that we have out here really can move you from CPT weights to contacts by visit type. And this is in this example here, this individual is doing 50% of their work in 30 minutes, and this is probably too small for you now that I'm thinking about it. There we go. They do 50% of their units in 30-minute individual, 45 here, and 5% in group. You'll see that that's 100% of their services. That generates 843 CPT units, or that generates 1,200 CPT units, and that would require 1,700 contacts. Remember that there's groups in here too, so every individual in the group is called as a contact. You get the average CPT weight by your service mix. It just provides you with a way, again, of sort of mapping out and modeling some behavior. There is a weekly productivity tool that allows you to, here's January week 1, January week 2, January week 3, allows you to input your CPT weights by individual, by week. It'll aggregate it for you. It'll give you your annual targets. It'll give where you are against your targets, what your surplus or shortfall is based upon where you are in the year. If this is the kind of a tool that you want to use to record, then you can go in and take a look at that. The last one that I'm going to show you is what I call the performance monitoring dashboard. It's really a blank graph that you can use for two different purposes. One of the things that we do is in this example, you basically put your basic parameters in. This is an example of a graph that could be used to graphically show people how they're doing on their units of service on a monthly basis. The line across the top here is called trajectory to target. It's the same number. That's their target here is 1,000 units. The graph is designed then as you do a start month, you do an end month, and then you just put your units in. If it's below the target, it'll be red. If it's above the target, it'll be green, and it gives you a year-to-date here at the end. So if you don't have this kind of thing, this is a relatively simple graph that really all you need to do is set up a couple parameters once and then load in your actual numbers, and it'll graph it for you.
So green is good.
Green is good. The other way you could use this is if you're doing performance monitoring and you're starting at a certain point and you want to get to another point. So basically what this basically said is that I've got a 45% no-show rate. I want to get it down to 15%. I'm going to give myself 8 months to do it. We're going to start that on January 1st, 2014. You load that in. It builds a graph. You put your data in, and it'll show you where you are against your target. You missed your target in through here, and then you hit May, and you started making your target, and at the end of the day, you made your target, and this allows you to watch that. So I know we went through those real briefly. In many cases, there is instructions on all of the tools. In many cases, there's a webinar that's attached specifically to it, and I would highly recommend that you go in and take a look and see if any of those would be helpful for you. I am going to hand this over to Justine, and Justine is going to be wrapping this up for us.
Sure. And David, actually, before I go into the final wrap-up, because I think that there are some kind of smaller, I think I can kind of move through those pretty quickly. We had two different questions come in, and I was wondering if you could briefly address them. So one is from a clinic director who's saying, you know, she's working with a staff that feels frustrated that they still don't have a new union contract, which has been in process for over 2 years, and they feel very stuck. And the leadership at the clinic level is not involved in the union negotiations, but they represent administration, so they kind of get the backlash. So they've been working really hard on team building and staff buy-in, but it's still, you know, a very challenging environment to work in. So any kind of tips or suggestions you have. And then the second question is, for the productivity tool you just reviewed, is it possible for it to be tied into the EMR so the performance numbers can be populated from the EMR system?
Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult. I think that in any Excel spreadsheet, you can develop a linkage between external data and I'm answering the easy one first, by the way. To do that. At the very least, you could pull data down out of the EMR into a summary and then populate the graph from that summary data. And in relation to the other question, I think that that's a specific set of circumstances, but many times we get into situations as we as leadership, Julie as a clinical leadership is dealing with a situation that she doesn't have a lot of control over, but is affecting the work and the morale and the performance of her staff. And that's a really difficult position to be in, and I sympathize with that. I guess it's you know, and this may sound, you know, at the end of the day, and I said this before, why are people there? Why are the people at the table? What is, you know, you're working with clinicians. Clinicians could be doing other things. They could be making more money. They could be doing something that's less stressful and less difficult, but they're at the table for a reason. And can you tap into that? Can you become part of the team and say, okay, these are distractions. These things sit outside of our control. Why are we here? What can we accomplish? What can we return to each other as staff? What can we return to our clients who are in need? What can we return to the community? Is there a way of working through the noise and getting to the core of what people, why they're there, and what makes them feel good about what they're doing? It's a very, very difficult thing to do, but that's the only suggestion that I would have is that you tie into why people are there, why are they doing what they're doing, and how do we build a team, how do we understand the good that we're doing and feel good about how we're able to continue providing that good to our clients, our community, and to each other, even though all this noise is going on in the background. That's the only thought I have, and believe me, it's a tough one.
And what I would say is I'm sure the clinic leadership has already done this, but to acknowledge that that person doesn't have any control on the outcome and can't make things move faster and can't fix things, and neither can the clinicians who are involved in waiting for the contract to go through. But what can we do, what can we actually do that would be helpful for you while you're waiting for that to happen? In what ways would you like me to recognize you? How do you feel, what could I do that would make you feel valued or enjoy your job better?
Yeah, it's tough. So, anything else, Justine? We're running out of time.
One last final question, and then I can do a very quick wrap-up, which is who enters data into all these spreadsheets you just reviewed?
Well, we don't. We have a system that generates the performance data directly out of our billing system. We developed these tools as aids for other people. I think really organizationally who you determine to do the input is really based upon your own internal workflows. They're simple enough that they could be populated by pretty much any staff. If you want to make sure that your clinicians really look at this and keep their hands in this, some of them are simple enough is like the last graph that I showed you. A clinician would have to add one number to their own spreadsheet every month to monitor their own performance. That could be I mean, somebody's got to generate that data, and it's going to come out of accurate sources, but if you want to engage your staff in their own monitoring, entering a single piece of data in a single position once a month to be able to monitor your performance, we tried to build them in a manner that would be really simple. Some of the other monitoring tools are more complicated. They could be done by clinic directors. They could be done by the staff directly. They could be done by support staff. You could even wrestle one of your finance staff in the hall and have them do it for you, but don't tell them I said you should do that.
Great. Thank you, David and Julie, for a really great presentation. I'm going to briefly go through the final steps of the webinar. Thank you. So, just to kind of what to expect going forward is we are going to be having the first call coming up soon. They've been half of them have been scheduled already, and so you should be receiving those invites through your Widgio sites, which all of you have been invited to. And this is just a brief structure for what to expect for the first call. We will be reaching out to you for the clinic presentations, and we've set a rough schedule. If it doesn't work for you, we can restructure it, but we thought it'd be easier to just set it up front and then kind of discuss on the first call if the schedule works for everyone. And we will be reaching out to one clinic to present on that first call. And, as you've kind of known from the face-to-face and the other things that we've had going forward, basically each call will be focused on problem solving for a specific issue a clinic is addressing. Each clinic will have an opportunity to present and get feedback from their fellow members. And again, we've sent up this listserv. Just a note for the listserv, if you press reply when you receive an email from the listserv, your email will be sent to everyone else on the entire listserv. I think sometimes people are unclear on that. And if you don't want to be continually receiving emails, you can just scroll to the bottom of the email. You can control your email preferences. You can choose to get absolutely no emails. You can choose to get a daily summary, or you can get every single email as they come. So that is within your control. We want you to be able to choose what, what kind of email frequency you want. We don't want it to be annoying to you. We do want it to be a resource for you to be able to learn more about your fellow members and also see what's upcoming in the CARE initiative. And with that, I think that's for the logistical questions. That's all I have. And we're about 4 minutes over, so I think it's time to wrap up. Julie and David, any closing comments?
No, really not for me. I think that it's, this is really sort of a conceptual framework for folks, holding people accountable. We've talked a lot about staying positive, giving people tools, working for an engagement and buy-in. Punitive needs to be part of the process, but celebrating successes and engaging your staff in the process towards meeting the end. And the end is good quality clinical care and returning value to our communities and to the people that we work with. Keeping that positive focus, I think, helps.
I don't really have anything to add. The reality is everybody's here because we want to help people. We all work very hard, and so if we all have to be together 35 to 40-plus hours a week, we might as well try to have it to be a really positive environment where we're all going to be and spend some time.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I hope that you found this to be helpful in organizing some of your thinking. You'll see on the website or the seminar some of the upcoming things. This webinar was recorded and will be available for you folks or members of your team that may not have been able to see it to be able to access the content here. I think on that note, I think we're done, Justine.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day and a weekend.
Thank you. Take care.